Welcome to the Toca Backstage Podcast. Join Toca's Executive Director, Chris Wolf, in conversations with the artists and people behind the scenes of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation's performances and events.
Welcome to another edition of Toca Backstage. This is Chris Wolf, the Executive Director of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation. It is my extreme pleasure to have Scot Bruce with me this morning. Scot is the star and creator, I guess, of Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which will be on Saturday, October 1st at 8 o'clock at the Armstrong Theater. Scot, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Hi, Chris. The pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
So before we started this, you had mentioned that you have a connection to the South Bay.
Absolutely. Yes. My wife and I now live in Palm Springs, but I lived in Playa del Rey for many years. And my wife worked at Little Company of Mary in Torrance. And so we do with Torrance and with the South Bay. And so it'll be like coming home, and I look forward.
Great. Awesome. So my first question is, why Elvis? You seem like a young man who may have missed that the whole bit. I mean, my mother was a big Elvis fan, but you seem a little too young for that.
Well, I always loved rock and roll, 50s rock and roll, 60s rock and roll. Always a fan. And really, it was in the 80s when there was kind of a resurgence of interest in rockabilly music, thanks to groups like the Stray Cats, the Polecats. There was just this renewed interest in rockabilly. And that led me to rediscover, what those guys were listening to. And of course, all roads lead back to Elvis. And though I was always an Elvis fan, with this renewed interest in Elvis, I just found his music and his career, his life to be very fascinating. And that's really kind of where it started for me.
Interesting. So you said you were an Elvis fan. When did you discover Elvis?
Well, I was aware of Elvis my whole life. I mean, his music is everywhere. Whether, young people these days, whether they're aware of it or not, Elvis is everywhere. And I just, it was, so I always liked Elvis and 50s music. But like I said, around the mid 80s, I just developed a new interest in Elvis, and I read a lot about him. I watched the movies. I watched a lot of documentaries, and I'm also I've been a lifetime musician. And around that time, I had the classic 80s mullet haircut with the Captain Kirk sideburns, and being a newly having newly discovered rockabilly and after becoming interested in Elvis, really interested in Elvis, I changed the hairdo to the classic 50s pompadour. And it was then that people said, you kind of look like him. And I really didn't think much about that part of it until I moved to California from Moscow, Idaho, and I found the cost of living slightly different, and that led me to think of ways that I could supplement what little income there was coming in, and that was sort of the beginning of putting together a tribute show.
Nice. So I also want to give. It's interesting because we obviously present a lot of tribute shows. We had one once where there was a gentleman who did Johnny Cash, who was excellent. But in talking to him, it was like that's all he did. He was just Johnny Cash. He no other musical pursuits. But I know that you're also a songwriter and have done other things musically, and an actor, because I understand that you were also on Days of Our Lives and Bold and the Beautiful.
Yes, and recently, actually, I appeared in the season 2 finale of the flight attendant, which was a whole lot of fun.
Okay.
But I'm a drummer first musically, but I've always been a guitar player as well. And so I definitely have musical interest outside of the Elvis act. But I think that the musical background is what helped me with develop my Elvis act, because being a musician first, I think in some cases, and I can only speak for myself, but it would seem that some people would put a tribute show together and then maybe look into the musical aspect of it. So I was a musician before starting the Elvis act.
And do you think too, though, that that was sort of, I mean, true confession time. I know, obviously I know Elvis's music. I know I've seen most of his movies. I'm not a huge fan, not like my mother, but do you think that Elvis's truest talent was the fact that he was a musician and a singer, a performer, and then he just sort of got caught up in sort of the Hollywood machine?
Well, Elvis was a stylist. He and he was a better guitar player than I think he was given credit for. His style of guitar playing, he was very percussive, and it was very important to the sound of his music. But it seems that and when Elvis started making records, what was happening was just something that occurred naturally, just within him. He just had something very special. But I think with the movies and with as he evolved into the Vegas show, the costuming became a little more flashy. It seems that Elvis's image kind of evolved into something that I would consider like kind of a caricature of Elvis. He almost became a caricature of himself near the end of his career. Like, for example, the exaggerated collars and the exaggerated sideburns and things like that. And that's just a matter of opinion, of course. But really, at the core of it, Elvis had something very special, and because of Elvis, popular music changed course. And many people believe that rock and roll was born on that day, January 5th, 1954, when Elvis, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black recorded "That's All Right, Mama." So, as I babble, Elvis's career took an interesting course that sometimes may have been beyond his control, but really at the core of it, Elvis really made a very important contribution to music and popular culture.
It's interesting because you mentioned sort of Elvis becoming sort of a caricature of himself. I always sort of saw it as the times, because obviously when you first started out, the denim, the suits, the things that the young Elvis wore were sort of popular of that time. But then I guess when you sort of fast forward into the 70s, 80s, I mean, I wore big, lapels and, just sparkly stuff too, but it's kind of like that was sort of I guess the appropriate fashion of the time. I mean, I dare to say what he would be wearing if he was still performing today. I mean, I'm sure it would be of what was popular during the time, right? I mean,
right. And it's interesting to think about that. And, it's interesting also to wonder how, fashion evolves like that. Did the artist kind of set a trend? I do know that I've read that Elvis was kind of self-conscious about his neck, so he flipped his collars up to kind of hide what he thought was sort of a gangly neck. But then that became kind of a fashion thing, or he moved his belt buckle sideways so he didn't scratch the back of his guitar, and then suddenly teenagers are wearing their belt buckle slightly to the side. So I don't. It's interesting to consider how fashion evolves like that. But you're right. He had to roll with the times. He had to be relevant with his music and with his look, of course. And by the 70s, a lot of artists, I mean, Tom Jones, the Osmonds, the Jacksons, it seems David Cassidy, everybody was thankfully, in a matter of opinion, thankfully that was just short-lived trend.
I think that opinion is shared by a great many people. It's like I wouldn't want to go back there to save my life. So what I'm curious though, when you've because you obviously had this desire to be a musician, a performing musician, a songwriter. Once you got caught up in doing the Elvis thing, was it just because it sort of skyrocketed and took you along with it, or was it something that you then said, no, this is something I really want to pursue?
Well, and that's a great question. To this day, I still love making music in many forms. I write. I love playing the drums. But Elvis, this show that we do is my primary bread and butter. And so when I really started actively pursuing it, it really was a sideline. But it really did evolve. Before I knew it, I was traveling all over the world and all over the country, doing these shows and doing this show, and also discovering that Elvis's appeal is certainly worldwide. And so it was not intended to be my full-time job, but it has become my full-time job, for which I'm extremely grateful. I love the music. I love celebrating it with people who love it as much as I do, and of course with my bandmates. And what's that expression? Life happens while you're busy making plans.
Yeah.
Again, I am just extremely grateful. I love what I do.
And I'm just curious, for your songwriting stuff, do you still produce your own music?
Not to the degree that I would like to and that I should. I have been jokingly been getting ready to make a record, but I have hundreds of songs ready to go, and I admit that I have not been as active with my own music as I would like to, but I'm reminded right now, as a matter of fact.
Well, and I only bring it up just because I'm always curious about the arc of a performer's career, and I agree. It's like you said, life happens while you're busy making plans. I'm busy, hiring artists to perform where I would love to be producing and directing myself. So it's like I totally get that, but I especially for artists such as yourself, who obviously have this immense talent, and they just are like I said, busy doing their thing. But I'm always curious as to what other things they have planned or lined up where they hope to be.
Sure, and we all have that, and I really do aspire beyond Elvis, but I just think of it. I feel like I just have the world's greatest day job, and so I believe that I will get to the recording when I can and when the time is right. But in the meantime, you never know when an inspiration will hit, and so I'll just keep creating music, and one day I hope to be able to share it.
Well, and I hope you will let us help you share it at some point. One of the things that the organization, the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation, does is we always help nurture up and coming performers. We like to encourage talented performers. We have a thing called South Bay's Got Talent, where we, people, young performers compete for prizes. And I always like to ask people that I talk to, what advice do you give young people coming to you saying, what should I do? How do I break into the business?
That's a good question too. The important thing, of course, I would tell any young person is, if they love, if they're passionate about it, never give up, and always pursue it, because it is worth it. But sometimes the most direct route from point A to point B might not always be a straight line. And I will give you a perfect example of that. In the early 90s, having moved to LA, I listened to Mark and Brian on KLOS pretty much daily. And they were big Elvis fans, and they talked about Elvis a lot. And around the anniversary of Elvis's passing, they were doing a lot of Elvis themed content in their show. And so I had not really put my act together. Well, I still don't have my act together, but I had not put my Elvis show together, but I was kind of working on it. And I decided I got to muster the courage to get gussied up as Elvis from the 50s with my guitar. I showed up at KLOS at 7:30 in the morning. I went to the guard shack, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm here to see Mark and Brian." And the guard called Mark and Brian and said, "Guys, Elvis is here to see you." And they said, "Well, if Elvis is here, you better send him in." And I went in there, and suddenly I'm in the control room of KLOS, standing there with Mark and Brian, who I'd listened to since moving to California. And we spent the whole morning talking about Elvis, singing songs. At this point, I had roommates. I didn't tell them what I was going to do, but they all listened to Mark and Brian, and they all heard it. And at the end of my visit with them, they announced my home phone on the air.
Yikes.
When I got home, the phone rang, and it was one of my roommates who could not believe what I had done that morning. And he said, Mark announced our phone number on the air, and you probably will be getting some calls, but there's something wrong with the answering machine. You might want to look at it. Well, the reason why the answer machine wasn't working was because the tape was full. I had about 30 calls, and some of those calls were not work-related opportunities, just because the phone number on the air, people just call a number. But some of those phone calls were legitimate work opportunities that came from that visit to Mark and Brian. And each one of those job opportunities led to another job opportunity and networking. And before I knew it, it was my full-time job. I had to quit the job that I had, because that changed the course of my life. And I'm sorry that it took a half hour for me to tell you that, but again, sometimes the line from point A to point B is not necessarily a direct line. And so I would say to young people, so you have a dream, what are you going to do about it?
And that's a great story, and that is so true. It's like you have to sort of make your own opportunities sometimes. And I think that your I don't know if it's a whim or just the gumption to do that is perfect to have, to any performer or anybody in general. I mean, I think that's a great life lesson, period.
Thank you. And that was scariest thing I ever did. And after that, I kind of, in a way, became fearless. I had done the scariest thing there ever was, and so everything else was easy.
Well, and that's, I mean, true. Anytime you take the onus to do something sort of way outside your comfort zone, and if you succeed, that just gives you, I guess, more nerve to sort of tackle the next thing, the next big giant. That's awesome. That's a great story. So
Yeah,
I understand also you were in music videos with Faith Hill, and one for Faith Hill and one with Sheryl Crow.
Also Tasman Archer, who was a European artist, and that was for MTV Europe. And again, all of those opportunities came my way, through agent representation, which came from the Mark and Brian show. And I was a regular after that on the Mark and Brian show. We did a lot of stuff together. They called me Scotty, the Elvis guy. But yes, and each one of those, yeah, and that's how that grows. Each job opportunity, it leads to networking and future work opportunities, and so yeah, those are fun, and so many stories. And I don't know what kind of time you have, but right after I did the Sheryl Crow video, it was called Leaving Las Vegas. It was from her debut album. Sure. There were multiple Elvis guys in that video, but they got some close-up shots of me. And right around that time, I booked a commercial and a tour in Finland. And so the night that I arrived in Helsinki, I got to my hotel, and I was still pretty awake, and I was in awe of the fact that I was in Europe for the first time. And it was because of the Elvis act. Excuse me. I went to the bar of the hotel. I sat at the bar, and I was the only person there. And I looked up, and there was that Sheryl Crow video on MTV Europe. And wow. There, and I couldn't believe that I was in Europe and I was seeing myself on television. But I said to the bartender, "Hey, that's me." And he looked at me and rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah, right." And that story great because he didn't believe me.
Now, did I understand you correctly that because of the Mark and Brian thing, you got your representation?
Yes, yes. I found an agent, and a variety of agents, actually. Agents who booked live concerts, agents who booked TV and film and things like that. And so it opened a lot of doors. And years after Mark and Brian went their separate ways, Mark Thompson came back to LA and did a show called Mark in the Morning. And he called me up and invited me on the show. And it was really fun to be able to just thank him and to tell him what an impact their help had on my life. And it's pretty amazing. I think about it often, and I can't say often enough how grateful I am for what I do. It really is fun.
Sure. Well, it's funny that, I mean, the Mark and Brian show was like a major thing, but I don't think they could do that now. I mean, I don't know of a radio show that is as successful, because now there's YouTube and Pandora and all the other apps, I guess. So there's really not those personalities on the radio as much.
I agree. Yeah, times have certainly changed. It is just so different out there now. But Mark and Brian, they existed when, Rick Dees and Mark and Brian and Stern, and there were these big personalities on the air that had huge listenership, if that's a word.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that exists now, but yeah, that you're right. That is a good point. There's just there's so much other, so many different ways for people to be amused.
I know. Well, it's that dreaded word, content. Everybody seems to have to make content, and I don't. It's like, to me, there's nothing like. Well, for me personally, there's nothing like going to see a live show. I mean, I think if you're not seeing a live performance, but just sitting in front of a computer screen, it's sort of not, you're missing the boat.
Well, I can't agree with you more. And, I wish I had more facts. I would think that as long as human beings have existed, one human being has stood in front of other human beings, and in some way, some form or another, has strived to entertain them on some level. And so live performance, I would say, goes back to, the beginning of the existence of human beings. And it's really important. And, it for so many, just the experience, as we know, of a live performance, that, being with others, and making connections, and just giving people the opportunity, and particularly these days, just escapism, just a 2 hours of forgetting about everything else that's going on in the world, and just having a really nice experience. That's really important.
Yeah, I would venture to agree with you. I that since the dawn of time, I am sure that Adam had some routine that he would perform for Eve just to keep her entertained.
Well, maybe there were more than one apple that he pulled off of the
There you go.
the forbidden fruit, and maybe hey, look at me. Maybe, yeah, who I think so.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I just want to remind people that, again, that it's Shake, Rattle, and Roll. It's one of the shows kicking off our season. It's October 1st at 8 o'clock at the James Armstrong Theater. Scott and his band will be performing the young Elvis, not the old. So you'll miss the big lapels, but you'll get the hip shaking, right?
Yes, and thank you, Chris. And the important thing is, it is all about the music for us. It's really important that we shift the focus away from that caricature that I was talking about earlier. That the karate chops, the thank you very much, that people kind of associate with an Elvis show. We really like to shift the focus back to what made Elvis so special in the first place, and that is the music. It's all about the music. I play with a group of guys who care about the quality and the authenticity of Elvis's music as much as I do, and that's really what this show is about.
Well, and I think you're right. That's awesome, because I think, again, people do get caught up in that. I mean, it's like every movie that sort of has an Elvis in it has the white jumpsuit with the sparkly things and the sideburns, like you said. But his whole persona is in the music, and his upbringing, where he came from. So I do hope people will come and just, like you said, escape for 2 hours.
Yes, indeed. Well, we sure look forward to it, and I thank you for your time. It's going to be a fun night. If I could sum it up in one word, I would say fun would be that word.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
All the best.